They didn't see her coming, not because she was invisible, but because they were trained not to see women like her at all. A black congresswoman from Texas with natural hair and fire behind her eyes wasn't who they expected to dismantle a media giant on live television. But that's exactly what happened. In a studio bathed in blue lights and red agendas, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She didn't fumble. She walked straight into the lion's den, Fox News, and let the world watch her pull the teeth out, one lie at a time. This wasn't a debate. This wasn't politics as usual. It was an ambush disguised as journalism, and they thought they could bury her in sound bites and stereotypes. What they didn't expect was that she came armed, with history, with law, and with every ancestor who ever had to swallow their dignity just to stay alive. Before we get too deep, tap like and subscribe if stories like this keep you up thinking. And if you're watching right now, drop your state and the time you're tuning in. We want to know who's still awake with them. Dim the lights, turn down the world. This is where the silence breaks. The green room was colder than it needed to be. Some said it was the overcompensation of studio lighting. Others knew better. It was just how Fox News liked to keep their guests uncomfortable, especially the ones who didn't belong. Jasmine Crockett didn't adjust her jacket. She didn't touch up her makeup. She just sat, still, quiet, watching. As the floor manager counted down, 3, 2, her fingers were folded gently in her lap. A single exhale left her lips as the theme music swelled. Showtime. Across from her, Sean Hannity leaned back in his leather chair like a man preparing for a victory lap he hadn't earned. To him, this was familiar turf, a perfectly lit arena where he'd mastered the art of disarming, dismissing, and dominating. His audience, millions deep and deeply partisan, had already made up their minds. He wasn't here to debate, he was here to reinforce. And tonight's target? A progressive black congresswoman with a legal mind and a reputation for being too direct. In other words, someone he could bait if she let him. Welcome back to Hannity, his voice boomed. Tonight, we're joined by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, here to explain the Democrats' latest obsession with playing the victim while America burns. The chyron beneath them read, "Woke agenda. Are progressives destroying American values?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement wrapped in punctuation. Jasmine didn't blink. Her hands remained folded, her eyes locked on him. Not with rage, but with the precision of someone who studied her opponents before taking them apart. She wasn't new to this. She'd been underestimated her entire life. In courtrooms, in committee hearings, on campaign trails lined with the smiling daggers. But she also knew the danger wasn't just in what Hannity would say, it was in what America would believe about her silence. So she measured it. He started slow. Let's get right into it, Congresswoman. You and your party love to talk about equity, race, reparations, systemic injustice. I get it. You came from the inner city, you saw things. But don't you think it's time we focus on what unites us, not what divides us? There it was, inner city, a term that danced just close enough to ghetto without saying it. Polite America's version of a slur. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, not in confusion, but as if filing away the phrase for later use. He continued, because I think Americans are tired of being told they're racist. I mean, the average guy working 2 jobs doesn't care about gender-neutral bathrooms or the 1619 Project. He cares about putting food on the table. Do you get that? The camera cut to her. She remained composed, unmoved. What Sean didn't realize, what so many like him never realized, was that she was that working-class story. Raised in South Dallas, public schools, student loans, first in her family to pass the bar. She knew the struggle intimately, but she also knew that the man speaking across from her had made millions telling that same working man who to blame for his pain, and it was never the system. It was always someone who looked like her. The studio lights were bright, but Jasmine's memory was brighter. She remembered her first eviction notice, the scent of bleach her mother used to clean houses, the trembling hands her father had after being denied a small business loan 3 times. She didn't need lectures on the American dream. She'd lived the nightmare version. Sean leaned in, sensing the moment. You talk about justice, but you defend criminals. You talk about unity, but you call half the country racist. Why should America listen to someone like you? The word someone like you lingered in the air longer than it should have. Jasmine smiled. Not wide, not forced, but the kind of smile a chess player gives before they sacrifice a pawn to trap the king. She didn't speak yet, not even a twitch. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Because Jasmine Crockett had walked into this studio not to argue. She came to expose. And the first step in exposure is letting people reveal themselves. As Hannity spoke over her, gesturing dramatically, listing grievances like a man rehearsing culture war theater, Jasmine began counting. Not out loud, not on her fingers, but in her mind with each buzzword he dropped. Bootstraps, woke, defund, cancel culture, inner city, law and order, victim mentality. By the 8th, she knew what this segment really was, a performance. A one-man monologue, desperate to convince America that the problem wasn't injustice. It was those who dared to call it by name. She waited, not because she didn't know what to say, but because some storms don't need to thunder right away. Some start with silence so thick it chokes the air. And tonight, Jasmine was that storm. Hannity leaned forward now, eyes narrowing, not in curiosity, but in calculation. He'd tested her patience. Now he was going to test her presence. You know, I've always found it funny, he began, voice dripping with that familiar blend of sarcasm and smugness, how the people yelling the loudest about justice are the ones defending the worst parts of society. He didn't need to say black. He just needed to say what America had been conditioned to associate. You stand up for the thugs who loot Target. You call it activism. You excuse violence in inner cities and pretend it's the system's fault. Not bad choices. He shrugged, eyes glinting. But sure, I'm the problem. He smirked, waiting for her to bite. She didn't, so he pressed harder. Your party talks about equity, but what they really want is dependency. More government handouts, more welfare queens collecting checks while decent Americans foot the bill. The phrase welfare queen sat in the air like poison in a glass of water. It had a history, it always did. Reagan popularized it in the 70s to vilify poor black women, turning poverty into a crime and survival into a scam. Jasmine blinked once, deliberate, controlled. Inside, her blood boiled, but her face stayed calm, carved in stone. Hannity continued, growing bolder. You want to talk about policing? You defend gangs. You want to defund law enforcement while mothers bury their children every weekend in cities run by Democrats. He leaned in further. Don't tell me it's about justice. Tell me why your party glorifies criminals and demonizes cops. She didn't shift, didn't flinch, didn't break. In that silence, it drove him mad. Because Hannity was used to volume, to outrage, to outbursts he could twist into confirmation. But this was worse for him. This was a black woman who wouldn't perform rage on cue. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shouting. She was watching. And in that stillness, he started spiraling. You don't care about unity. You want revenge, reparations, redistribution. You think success is a crime now? What happened to pulling yourself up by your bootstraps? He said it with a sneer, as if the word itself could cleanse him of the implications. Bootstraps, the fairy tale anthem of American exceptionalism. So often told by those born halfway up the ladder to those still trying to find the bottom rung. Jasmine didn't roll her eyes. She just let the silence stretch like a noose, because silence can sometimes make lies echo louder. Hannity sensed the moment slipping, so he reached into the well of old tropes and pulled out something darker. You know, I remember when Democrats used to care about law and order, he said. Now they defend super predators. That was the one, super predator, coined in the 1990s to dehumanize young black men. An academic slur turned media obsession turned policy disaster, fueling the mass incarceration of an entire generation. And he said it so casually, so intentionally. Jasmine inhaled, slow, deep. eyes closed just for a second. She wasn't reacting, she was choosing. She could have lit the room on fire. She could have torn the set down with truth, facts, pain, but not yet. Not while he was still digging his own grave. So she let him. And let's be honest, Hannity continued, voice rising with false confidence. If people like you had your way, we'd all be living in some kind of socialist inner-city nightmare run by woke activists who care more about pronouns than patriotism. He laughed. Good luck with that. Then came the pivot, the moment he tried to seal the narrative. You're not fighting for the people, Congresswoman. You're fighting for attention, for Twitter, for the squee, for likes and retweets and woke cred. He shook his head, feigning disappointment. I don't hate you, Jasmine. I pity you. And there it was, pity, the most weaponized condescension in the American political playbook. Not hatred, not rage, but the calm, patronizing gaze that says, you don't belong here. And deep down, you know it. But Jasmine, she did belong, more than him, more than this studio, more than the empire of echo chambers he built. She wasn't here to win the round. She was here to take the stage and flip the lights on. And so she sat, regal, grounded, silent, while the man across from her danced through decades of dog whistles and barely veiled slurs, thinking he was writing her narrative, not knowing she was just giving him rope. The studio was quiet for too long. Even the production crew, hidden behind their cameras and comms, noticed the tension thickening like a storm cloud. Hannity had finished his tirade. He'd played every card he knew, race-baiting tropes, classist smears, and cultural panic buttons. And still, nothing. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. Not a flicker of panic, not a defensive twitch, just stillness. It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from being cornered, but from being in control. Because Jasmine wasn't playing checkers. She was studying the whole board. She'd grown up around men like him. Polished, powerful, loud. Men who mistook volume for victory. Men who believed that if they talked long enough, fast enough, and over you often enough, they could rewrite the truth in real time. But she also knew something else. Letting a man like Hannity talk long enough wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Because every time he spoke, he gave the world a little more proof of the world she'd been fighting against her whole life. Her eyes didn't break contact with him, but inside her mind was working like a litigator preparing her closing argument. She began cataloging his words, not emotionally but surgically. Thugs, welfare queen, super predator, bootstraps, inner city, victim mentality. It wasn't just dog whistle politics. It was a symphony of structural racism masquerading as common sense. And it was a textbook. So predictable, it was almost boring. She'd faced tougher questions from third-year law students. But here, in this televised performance, the danger wasn't the man, it was the microphone in front of him. Hannity wasn't here to have a conversation. He was here to create content, to generate clips, provoke outrage, and feed a narrative machine that lived off conflict and confirmation bias. And Jasmine, she refused to be his content. Behind her eyes, something deeper stirred, a memory. Her first month as a public defender in Dallas County, a 17-year-old black boy stood trial for stealing diapers. The prosecutor called him a repeat offender, citing 2 previous shoplifting arrests from when he was 15. No one asked why he was stealing. No one asked who he was stealing for. But Jasmine had, and when she stood in that courtroom, she didn't speak first. She waited, let them talk, let them condemn, let them expose themselves. And when they were done, she rose, not in defense but in truth. She told the judge about the boy's mother, paralyzed in a work accident, about the Medicaid application that had been pending for months, about the eviction notice pinned to their front door with duct tape. The judge dropped the charges, and she never forgot what silence made possible. Back in the studio, Jasmine let that same silence stretch, daring Hannity to sit with the weight of his own words. But she knew he wouldn't. Men like him filled space, not because they had something to say, but because they were terrified of the silence. Silence, after all, was where accountability lived. She breathed in, slowly, let the cameras roll, let America see it. A black woman under fire, choosing her moment, not silenced, but strategic, not flustered, but focused, because this wasn't about him anymore. This was about the millions watching. The single mother in Mississippi who'd been told she was lazy for needing food assistance. The young black man in Ohio pulled over for a broken taillight and held at gunpoint. The immigrant nurse in Arizona called a moocher by her senator despite working double shifts through the pandemic. This wasn't just a television debate. This was a mirror, reflecting America back to itself. And so, Jasmine waited. She let the silence thicken, becoming uncomfortable. Not for her, but for him. She knew what Hannity was expecting. Defensiveness, outrage, a headline-worthy meltdown. But Jasmine Crockett had learned early in life, you don't show fire too early in a courtroom. You let the other side build their illusion. Then when the moment's right, you burn it down with fact. She gently unfolded her hands, still no words, just one movement, intentional, powerful, the kind of gesture that doesn't beg to be seen, but demands to be noticed. In her lap rested a thin manila folder. She hadn't touched it since the interview began, but now, with the calm of a surgeon, she opened it. Inside, quotes, case law, economic data, and archived clips, including one from Sean Hannity himself, 1994, defending the use of the term super predator on his radio show. That was the thing about men like Sean. They forgot the internet remembers everything. Jasmine glanced at the producer's monitor in the corner, where the countdown timer ticked toward the final segment. She had 3 minutes left. 3 minutes to change the narrative. 3 minutes to remind America that silence doesn't mean surrender. It means preparation. Because sometimes the storm doesn't come with thunder. Sometimes it walks in wearing a blazer and afro curls and waits for the exact moment to strike. 3 minutes, that's all she needed. Jasmine Crockett finally looked up, directly into the camera this time, not at Sean Hannity. Her voice was calm, measured, not loud, not dramatic, but clear enough to cut through static and spin. You quoted Ronald Reagan earlier, she said, breaking nearly 8 minutes of silence. Hannity blinked. He hadn't realized she'd been listening that closely. He hadn't realized she'd been studying. Reagan once said, she continued, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. She paused, let it settle, let the silence that once protected her now work for her. And I agree. Sean straightened in his chair. He wasn't sure where she was going, but suddenly it didn't feel like his show anymore. I was born in the South, Sean. I've lived what some folks just talk about. I've seen what happens when rights are whispered about in textbooks, but denied in real life. And when I fight for equity, when I speak out about injustice, I'm not attacking America, I'm protecting exactly what Reagan referenced. That line hung in the air like scripture. I'm protecting exactly what he referenced. In 9 words, she flipped the frame. She wasn't anti-American. She was the continuation of its deepest promises. She turned slightly toward Sean, not to engage, but to expose. You said I defend thugs, that I glorify crime, that I represent some woke inner-city nightmare. Let me ask you something. She pulled a page from the folder. Do you know what happens when a corporation dumps toxic waste in a poor black neighborhood and no one gets charged? Sean opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. She continued, when a working mother is denied bail for stealing baby formula, but a white-collar executive who launders millions walks free, what do you call that? She didn't wait for his answer. She didn't need one. She flipped to another page. When black voters in Georgia stand in lines for 8 hours just to cast a ballot, and your party makes it illegal to give them water, how is that not voter suppression? Her voice didn't rise, but her words hit like a gavel. This isn't about thugs, it's about justice. She glanced at the camera again, her tone sharper now, like a closing argument before a jury of millions. You told America I defend criminals, but you defend a system where zip code predicts incarceration more than behavior, where we spend more on prisons than public schools, where law and order means armored vehicles in poor neighborhoods and silence in corporate boardrooms. She looked at Hannity now, and for the first time he looked cornered. You say people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But what if they were never given boots to begin with? The studio fell still. No comeback, no interruption, just the sound of truth echoing through polished silence. Then came the dagger, polite, poised, but lethal. "You say you pity me, Sean." She leaned forward slightly, eyes unblinking. "But I pity the America you defend, where dignity is a privilege, not a right, where justice depends on your zip code, where freedom is promised to all, but delivered to some." She pulled one last quote from her file. "You once said on air, if you obey the law, you have nothing to worry about." That was in 2014 after a black teen was killed walking home. Hannity froze. "And yet we've seen grandmothers gunned down during no-knock raids. Kids shot playing with toy guns. We've seen freedom obey the law and still get buried." Jasmine sat back, silent again. But this time it wasn't a defensive stillness. It was the stillness of someone who just broke the narrative, ripped the script, and rewrote the final scene. The control room didn't know what to do. Producers whispered into earpieces. A floor manager signaled something off camera. But at that moment, none of it mattered, because the audience wasn't watching Hannity anymore. They were watching her, a congresswoman, a black woman, a lawyer, a storm they thought would pass. But she didn't pass. She struck. And in doing so, she didn't just win the round, she changed the rules. Sean shifted in his chair, uncomfortable, searching for the next line. But everything he prepared now felt hollow, like echoing inside a collapsed monument. Jasmine looked at the camera one last time, her voice now almost a whisper. "You want to talk about freedom, Sean?" She smiled, not smugly, but with the calm of someone who knew she had already won. Freedom isn't about avoiding discomfort. It's about confronting truth, even when it scares you. Silence followed, not the kind that chokes, but the kind that heals. Because for the first time in the whole segment, America had just heard the whole truth. Sean Hannity blinked fast, twice, then forced a grin. It was the kind of grin people wear when the walls start closing in, but they still believe they can smile their way out. He straightened in his chair, cleared his throat, and let out a forced chuckle. "Okay," he said, trying to wave it off. "So now I'm the villain? Come on, Congresswoman. That's the oldest trick in the book." He leaned forward, dropping the charm and slipping into defense. "You're not here for justice," he snapped. "You're here to score points. You want to go viral. You want applause from Twitter, TikTok, whatever corner of the internet validates this kind of victimhood mentality." The crack had begun, not in his voice, but in the way he tried to retake control. His words stumbled over each other, each one louder than the last, as if volume could bury what Jasmine had just done. "You talk about the system like it's out to get you," he said. "But look at you. You're a sitting congresswoman. You're the system now. How can you claim oppression when you're living in privilege?" There it was, the classic pivot, from accountability to resentment. If a black woman holds power, she's no longer allowed to speak on injustice. Never mind how she got there. Never mind what she's endured to stay. Jasmine didn't respond. She let the silence answer for her. And that silence was louder than anything he had to offer. So he doubled down. "You know what I think?" he asked, jabbing a finger toward her across the desk. "You don't want equality. You want payback. You want to make white Americans feel guilty for things they didn't do." He said it like an accusation, like guilt was heavier than death. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, just enough to let him know, "You just stepped in it." And still, he kept going. "You talk about fairness," he said, "but I don't see fairness in special treatment. I see quotas, I see handouts, I see entire communities addicted to government aid while honest folks pay taxes and get nothing back." He spat the words now. Welfare queens, entitlement culture, inner city excuses. Every syllable sounded like a ghost from America's past and present. Jasmine didn't flinch, because she'd heard this before. So had her grandmother. So had her mother. So had every woman who ever sat in a waiting room while being judged for needing help. The camera panned to Sean. He was unraveling, and he didn't know it. To him, this was righteous anger. To everyone else, it was desperation wrapped in dogma. "You can't say anything anymore without being called a racist," he grumbled. "You people have made it impossible to even be proud of your country. You people, The words slipped out like venom. The moment they left his mouth, the room froze. Even the floor director's head turned. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, slowly, like she just heard a confession. Because she had. There it was, the line that crossed the line. He tried to recover. I didn't mean it like that. But it was too late. The thing about cracks is once they start, they spread. You know, Hannity continued, now rushing, people like me, we're tired of walking on eggshells, of being blamed for history, of being called names just because we believe in law and order. He was off script now. This wasn't commentary anymore. This was a man unraveling on live television, turning himself into the victim because he had no answer for the truth. I work hard. I pay taxes. I don't owe anyone anything, he snapped. I didn't own slaves. My grandfather worked in a factory. Nobody gave him handouts. There it was again, the myth of purity, used to erase the stains on history, but the audience wasn't buying it anymore, especially not after hearing Jasmine lay out the receipts, especially not after hearing him say, you people. Jasmine didn't speak, not because she had nothing to say, but because Hannity was doing it for her. He'd lost the room. He just didn't know it yet. And in that silence, the internet began to stir. Clips were already being cut, transcripts tweeted, hashtags drafted. Hashtag you people have freedom, as every generation, had Crockett versus the machine. The backlash was forming, and it wasn't from just one side anymore. Sean finally paused, realizing the weight of what he'd just said, realizing the emails that would hit his inbox, realizing that even some of his own audience wouldn't be able to spin this into tough truth. He looked at Jasmine, searching perhaps for mercy, but Jasmine didn't offer mercy. She offered clarity. She leaned in gently and said nothing. And that's what hurt the most, because sometimes when power crumbles, the loudest sound is silence. By the time the interview ended, the internet was already on fire. The full segment hadn't even aired in all time zones, but clips of Sean Hannity saying you people were flooding social media. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't just trend. She surged. Hashtag Crockett was right, protecting. What he referenced, wow, was you time. The silence she wielded like a weapon had become a movement. But not everyone was ready to reckon with what they saw. On right-wing blogs, the spin machines revved into overdrive. Hannity taken out of context. Woke mob attacks patriot. Another liberal setup. Commentators on conservative podcasts called it a witch hunt, blaming the race card and accusing Jasmine of being strategically fragile. They said she had ambushed Hannity, that her calm was performative, that she was trained to bait, as if intelligence in a black woman was some kind of trap. But beyond the echo chambers, something else was happening. A quiet awakening. In small towns and working-class neighborhoods, people who didn't usually speak up started listening, and some of them started changing their minds. An ex-Marine in Ohio posted, I've watched Hannity for 10 years, but that lady made more sense in minutes than he has in months. I didn't like what he said. I'm thinking different today. A suburban mom in Pennsylvania commented, I've never thought of myself as woke or political, but she didn't yell, she didn't accuse, she just told the truth. That hit me. Even inside conservative media, cracks appeared. A Fox contributor, off air but mic still hot, was caught saying, that wasn't a good look for Sean. She made him sound small. But with the shift came the resistance. Suddenly, Twitter was crawling with troll accounts defending Hannity with artificial outrage. Hannity's under attack for being white. Stay strong, Sean. This is what happens when you let radicals on Fox. She's the racist, not him. Many of these accounts had no photos, no followers, no past posts, bot armies, paid narratives, manufactured dissent. It was a distraction tactic, one designed to drown out Jasmine's rising support. But this time it didn't work, because something had changed. This time the truth had receipts. Clips were everywhere. Side-by-sides of Jasmine quoting Reagan and Hannity quoting himself from 1994. Memes, podcasts, TikToks by teenagers breaking down the dog whistles of inner city, welfare queen, and bootstraps like they were decoding national secrets. Even a few high school history teachers uploaded full lessons titled, "What Jasmine Crockett Taught Us Last Night." And then it happened. The Dallas Morning News, her hometown paper, ran the headline, "From Courtroom to Cable War, Jasmine Crockett Doesn't Flinch." The article praised her composure, her command of legal precedent, and her ability to hold space in hostile terrain. Then came the New York Times, then the Root, then Rolling Stone bound. Each piece didn't just report the moment, they dissected it, and piece by piece the power shifted. But Jasmine, she stayed quiet. She didn't gloat, she didn't go on a victory tour, she didn't tweet, "I told you so." Instead, she posted a photo, no caption, just her in the green room, sitting quietly, folded on her lap, looking straight ahead. It went viral in minutes because people knew that folder held facts, that silence held strength, and that woman held a storm. Inside Congress, colleagues who once whispered "too radical" now whispered, "she's the real thing." Even some moderates who distanced themselves from the squad started leaning in. "You handled that with more class than I ever could," one senator texted her. Jasmine didn't reply, because this wasn't about class, it was about clarity. But the real shift wasn't on Capitol Hill. It was on the ground, in barbershops in Atlanta, in bodegas in the Bronx, in truck stops in Missouri, in college dorms in Detroit. They weren't just sharing her words, they were reclaiming their own. Because in Jasmine, they didn't just see a politician, they saw someone who survived the same slurs, the same erasure, the same "you people" politics. And for once, someone didn't just survive the attack. She reversed it. No one saw it coming. Not the network, not the think tanks, not even Jasmine's closest aides. They knew she'd handled herself with precision. They knew the silence was louder than the storm. They knew the facts she dropped had scorched through spin. But no one knew that just one line, buried near the end of the broadcast, would detonate across the country like a thunderclap. It wasn't delivered with a shout. It wasn't pre-written for applause. It was quiet, unrehearsed, almost an afterthought. And that's why it hit so hard. It came after Sean Hannity had finally gone silent. After he'd stumbled through his own logic, exposed his own bias, and reached the end of his rhetorical rope. Jasmine had leaned in, calm and composed, eyes locked with the camera, and said, "If my existence feels like a threat, maybe it's not me you're afraid of. Maybe it's the mirror." That was it. No slogan cadence, just surgical honesty, the kind that doesn't need a second draft. And at that moment, America stopped scrolling. It hit first on Black Twitter. Within minutes, the quote was clipped, shared, and reposted across thousands of timelines with one word: bars. Then came the deeper commentary. She didn't raise her voice once, but she shook the room. This is what power looks like in its most dignified form. Say it again for the people hiding behind flags in fear. Within hours, the line became an anthem. TikTok creators lip-synced it over slow-motion videos of civil rights protests. Teachers wrote it on whiteboards in high school government classes. Churches printed it on bulletins beside scriptures about truth and reflection. By morning, it had crossed digital lines. A Latino student group in Arizona posted the above photos of students protesting anti-immigrant policies. An Asian American women's collective used it in a video honoring victims of hate crimes. A white veteran in Kentucky made a reel explaining why the mirror line made him rethink what patriotism actually means. Late that night on MSNBC, a political analyst broke it down like it was Shakespeare. That one sentence cut deeper than a filibuster ever could. It wasn't just a clapback, it was an X-ray of American denial. The mirror. That's what it started being called. On Reddit, someone wrote, "She gave the nation a mirror and asked, 'Are you brave enough to look?' Even people who didn't fully agree with her politics paused." A conservative radio host in Nashville confessed, "I didn't like how the segment went, but damn, that line, that's gonna stick. That's history." And it was. In just 14 words, Jasmine Crockett had taken a hostile interview and turned it into a national intervention. No anger, no insult, just the truth, staring America down like a reflection it couldn't unsee. By day 3, merchandise exploded. Shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, phone cases, not with her face, not with her party logo, just the words, "If my existence feels like a threat, maybe it's not me you're afraid of. Maybe it's the mirror." The quote was even printed unofficially on the back of a bus in Atlanta. Someone graffitied it onto a construction wall in Oakland. A muralist painted it next to Breonna Taylor's portrait in Louisville. A professor submitted it to be archived in the Library of Congress as part of a digital collection on Black women in politics. It had become something bigger than Jasmine. In her district back in Texas, high school seniors quoted her in graduation speeches. "I'm not here to be quiet," one student said, holding back tears. "I'm here to hold up the mirror." Another student had it stitched on the back of her denim jacket in gold thread. Even her political opponents struggled to keep up. A moderate Republican congressman tweeted, "We don't always agree, but we need more truth-tellers like Jasmine Crockett." The shift was undeniable. And Jasmine? She never reposted the quote. She didn't frame it, didn't retweet it, didn't run with it as a brand. She just kept working, like she always had, in committee hearings, in underfunded schools, in over-policed neighborhoods, because she didn't say it to be famous. She said it because it was true. When a reporter finally asked her, weeks later, what she meant by the mirror line, she smiled and replied, "People get angry when the reflection shows something they'd rather not face. But we can't fix what we won't acknowledge. And America's had a broken mirror for too long." That quote didn't go viral, but for those who were listening, it said everything. When the lights faded and the cameras cut, the battle seemed over. But Jasmine Crockett knew better. This was never just about a segment on Fox News. It wasn't even about Sean Hannity. It was about what came next. And what came next was movement. Within a week, Jasmine's office received over 30,000 emails. Not from donors, not from party officials. From teachers, bus drivers, single moms, veterans, college students, and former skeptics. Some wrote to thank her. Some wrote to ask how they could help. Many just wrote to say, "I finally saw someone speak the way I feel." One email from a young Black law student in Mississippi simply said, "I almost dropped out last month. You gave me a reason to keep going." Another came from a retired sheriff in North Carolina. "I don't agree with you on everything, but that was the clearest case I've ever seen for what justice should sound like." Policy followed. A bipartisan coalition, once reluctant to touch anything related to police reform, quietly revived talks on no-knock warrant limitations, spurred by Crockett's mention of grandmothers killed in botched raids. In her own committee, Jasmine pushed forward a long-stalled bill that would require federal data tracking on prosecutorial misconduct, and this time it passed markup with support from both sides of the aisle. Even in her home district, something shifted. At a town hall in Oak Cliff, attendance doubled. Not for free food, not for giveaways. People came to listen, to ask questions, to learn what they weren't taught in school, to talk about mirrors and what it means to face them. In South Dallas, a group of teenagers started a podcast called Mirror Talk. Their first episode, "Why We Don't Yell to Be Heard." One of them, 16-year-old Malik, said, "If she can sit in that chair, on that stage, and not flinch, then I can sit in mine and speak up in class." It wasn't a soundbite, it was a blueprint. Meanwhile, conservative networks scrambled. Hannity's team aired a clarification segment, framing the interview as spirited and misunderstood. But the damage was done. Sponsors called, internal review boards were launched, staffers started leaking anonymous quotes. One insider said, "He got outmaneuvered by someone who didn't even raise her voice. They don't know how to fight that kind of power." Because it wasn't volume, it was values. CNN ran a weekend special, The Mirror Moment, Race, Power, and the Silence That Spoke. They invited Jasmine. She declined. Instead, she was at a neighborhood school that Saturday, helping pass out free tablets to kids learning remotely, because that was always the assignment, not to trend, not to clap back, but to lift. And in Black churches across the country, pastors invoked her words in sermons. "We are not the threat. We are the mirror, and a mirror can't lie. It can only show what's already there." The congregation stood, clapped, and cried. Not because they were angry, but because someone had finally told the truth without breaking under pressure. In the months that followed, Jasmine's approval rating soared, not just among progressives, but among independents and young voters who'd stopped believing anyone in Washington had backbone. She didn't change who she was. She didn't pivot to play the game. She just kept showing up, clear, calm, and unshaken. And that consistency became a storm of its own. She was invited to speak at law schools, at civil rights conferences, at high schools named after presidents who never saw women like her as equals. And every time she spoke, the room didn't roar. It listened, because Crockett had proven something rare. That dignity is not weakness. That silence can be louder than spin. And that truth, when spoken with clarity, doesn't need a mic drop. It echoes all on its own. Months later, a reporter asked Jasmine if she thought the moment had changed anything. She looked up, smiled slightly, and said, "I don't think the moment changed the world. I think it reminded people they can." And that was the aftermath. Not fireworks, not headlines, but something deeper. A country slowly turning to face its reflection and seeing, for the first time in a long time, not shame, not guilt, but the possibility of becoming better. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't interrupt. She didn't slam her hand on the desk or storm off set. She just told the truth. With facts, with poise, and with a calm so disarming, it shook the foundation beneath her opponent. In a world addicted to noise, she proved that clarity cuts deeper than chaos. And when the moment came, she didn't just defend her name, she defended her people, her purpose, and the promise of a better country. Because that's what this story was really about. Not a television segment, not a takedown, but a mirror held up to a system too used to distorting its reflection. A mirror held by a black woman from Texas who never asked for permission to be powerful. She just was. And when she said, "If my existence feels like a threat, maybe it's the mirror," she wasn't attacking anyone. She was inviting all of us to look closer. Because justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins in conversations, in accountability, in courage. And sometimes it begins in silence, the kind that waits, then speaks like thunder. This story is a dramatized and fictionalized account meant to reflect real struggles in modern America. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. Now, before you go, take a breath. And if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Tap like to help stories like this reach those who need to hear them. Subscribe if you want more narratives that challenge power without chasing spectacle. Leave a comment below. Tell us which moment hit hardest for you. And share this with someone who still believes the quietest people often carry the deepest truths. Because maybe the next Jasmine Crockett isn't in office yet. Maybe she's just waiting for a sign that her voice matters. Maybe she's watching now. And if she is, we hear you, we see you, and we're not looking away. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative inspired by real-world political dynamics. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental.